Distinguished and eminent chair and moderator, Lieutenant General Vinod Khandare, Senior Advisor, Ministry of Defence. Let's put our hands together to welcome our eminent distinguished moderator for the Powers session on space, the fourth frontier of warfare. Also inviting eminent speakers for the session, I invite Lieutenant General PJS Pannu, retired, former Deputy Chief IDS and Distinguished Fellow USI. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together to welcome him. Also inviting Air Marshal Gurcharan Singh Bedi, AVSM, VSM, former Director General Inspection and Safety. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together to welcome him. Inviting Lieutenant General M.U. Nair, AVSM, SM, SONC. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Let's put our hands together to welcome him. Inviting Air Vice Marshal D.V. Khot, Director General Defence Space Agency. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Inviting Mr. Venkat Katkuri, Head of Airbus Defence and Aerospace India. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are all set to go ahead with the proceedings of the Powers session, Space, the Fourth Frontier of Warfare. Our distinguished chair and moderator for this session, Lieutenant General Vinod Khandare, a Senior Advisor, Ministry of Defence. And the time duration for this session, ladies and gentlemen, is approximately 55 minutes. And may I now hand over to our chair and moderator to kindly carry forward the proceedings of this session with your opening remarks, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, let's once again put our hands together to welcome the distinguished panel on the stage.
Jai Hind and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And on the stage, we have luminaries who are subject matter experts. They've been practitioners, they are still practitioners. And we are going to talk about the defense and security aspects. In the audience, I see a lot of learned people, so I'm not going to talk more about the new forms of warfare. And in the last 2 days, we have been discussing more about the economics of space. Now we have people here on the stage who are going to talk about the security aspects. Somebody did make a mention that warfare does not attract revenue. That's a big question mark. And the investments in the security sector, to some, do not make business sense. But I would like to leave a thought to you that equipping the armed forces and the security sector well is a definite assurance of very high rates of returns of investment. So if we take that as a start point, and I'm not getting into more of ceremonials, but more of substance, the panel in front of you is of people who have been into this field and continue to delve into a lot of research, a lot of thought process, churning of knowledge, and getting wisdom out for all of us. While normally we talk of warfare starting with an air campaign, these days we are talking of electromagnetic spectrum campaign. But I will make an exception. I'll start with General Pannu, and I'll request him to open the session by talking about things which he has been very passionately involved. He has had the experience of tri-services integration into issues related to new forms of warfare, and that is science and technology, that is related to space, that's related to cyber, that's related to information warfare. So let us hear him, and I would request the speakers to restrict to about 7 to 8 minutes, because we would like to give more time for the question and answer session. Over to you, General Pannu.
Jai Hind, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Chair. I was very moved by the date on which we are having this conference. In fact, last 2 days, and today being the third day, reminds me that yesterday was celebrated as the Infantry Day, and why it was celebrated Infantry Day was that the moment Maharaja of Kashmir signed a letter of accession, there was huge amount of attack which came in from Pakistan, and it was a surprise. Some 40 to 50,000 irregulars who had already been prepared to attack India in formed units of 2,000 each, called Lashkars, had already crossed the border on 22nd of October. And yesterday was the day when one of our battalions, 1st Sikh Battalion, had to land in Kashmir airfield, only to realize that the Kabilis, these raiders, had reached almost 2 kilometers away from Kashmir. We had no idea what was happening. If that had happened today, I think the satellites would have captured the organization and the number of vehicles which were moving using one single track which went into the Kashmir Valley, that was Muzaffarabad-Uri track. Number of vehicles came in, completely went unnoticed. One of the battalions actually at Domail had been butchered by their own colleagues, and there was no information out because otherwise they would have given the information back. There was communication which had failed because at that time, the Second World War equipment was being used. The HF communication failed. HF communication could not work, and no VHF was there to the level that we know. In mountains, there was nothing that worked, and there was no communication which could actually come the side to understand what. Had that been there today, our satellites would have picked up these vehicles, and satellites would have told us what are the direction and what are the timing and where they have reached, and maybe things would have been very different. Again, in the month of October, 20th of October, China attacked us. That is 60 years back. We had no idea that they had built a road. Now we are calling it G213. And all of a sudden, after India became independent, we were comfortable in drawing maps which showed Exai as part of India. Of course, POK story I have already spoken about. And we thought that was our territory, and that's it. And all of a sudden, we discovered that China has built a road there. And now what do? Our leadership announced that we will have a forward policy. And on this day, 5th Jat Battalion had lost Galwan post. They had no idea how many Chinese are there on the other side of the hill and how many have actually come very close to them and observing. Of course, some of them were there, and they were shouting slogans of Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai as they were attacking. But they had no idea that had happened. We had no idea the road was built. Had the technology been available today, we would have understood that the road is coming up. That is the kind of situational awareness which the fourth frontier of warfare will give us, which is the space. Going back to how the Indians believe that we all feel upar wala karega. Literally speaking, technology abhi upar wala hi hai. Ultimately, all the ground elements, all the technology has exhausted to a point that we have started depending on space for everything. Every communication, every solution, everything is going to be in the space. And I think thanks to ISRO that we are a spacefaring nation, and thanks to the privatization, we will be a space power very soon. As far as the ISR is concerned, the first and foremost thing is that we had no idea how the maps are made. The Survey of India went and started doing reconnaissance, through trig heights and all that, and relative height used to be written, and then the contours were cut, and that is how the maps were made. But today we don't have. Ultimately, when we had the GIS maps available to us, most of the GIS maps are reading different grids because they were used with different techniques and different technologies. And therefore, if you want to fight a war together between Army, Navy, Air Force, you find that we don't have the same GIS applications. If the maps are made from the satellite, made together the way it is, we would not have had to find the relative heights and then through approximation carve out the contours. All the mountain warfare where we have no idea what is on the other side of the hill. In fact, one of the time when my unit was deployed, my GOC asked him, "Do you know what is the other side of the hill?" I said, "No, I don't know, because the radars cannot be fired because our electronic emission will be picked up by the enemy, and then our position will be caught. That is called something called EEP status, so we are not supposed to fire radars. That is precisely what the ELINT is meant to be. But today, we have the available technology where the electronic emissions and the ELINT would be picked up by the payload, which is in the satellite. So much so that when we have to use our shooter and sensor for fighting a warfare, and ultimately we realize that we need to fight a precision battle, and precision battle can only be fought if we have a good GPS equivalent or the PNT, which is owned by us. Because there are techniques that even if you're riding on some other PNT system, it can be spoofed. And you will be way off if you use that. So IRNSS has made it possible for the Indian NAVIC system to come up. But I think a lot of more work needs to be done to reach that shooter-sensor combination. And fortunately that we have had a good missile program in the DRDO. And because of the good missile program that we've gone into rocket stage very easily, and we have launch capabilities, which is very interesting. But the point is that a country having a missile program is very important if you want to have a successful space program, and many countries don't have it. And I think the DRDO and the ISRO combined together have done a great job there. The space situational awareness, the number of satellites which have been thrown up, of course, they are registered by the ITU, but still we do not know for dual use what job are these satellites doing for living on top. Well, you can put any payload. Payload can be for civilian application, it can be for remote sensing or what, but actually the applications are dual use, and you never understand what it is. So I think we need to also look at the space situational awareness and build systems into it so that we know कि दुश्मन की satellite अगर है तो है क्या, कर क्या रही है. That is very important. The number of satellites which are going to be thrown up, of course, we are talking about the LEO, MEO constellation, and thousands of satellites being planned to be sent up for military application in the US Army. They're making huge amount of money, as General Khandare said, that the US military itself is spending $35 billion US. That is a budget given to them. And I think we need to put budget if we want success. So I think budgetary allocation to the space sector in the military is extremely important. And who's developing this? Is the civilian manufacturers putting the SpaceX, where 4,000 plus satellites are going to be put up, and they will be throwing up 23 terabytes per second worth of bandwidth, which is going to be used for American use. So DARPA has actually worked on these networks, and we will realize that when I was building, we also raised the space agency, the cyber agency put together, which makes it to the fourth and the fifth frontier of warfare combined together. I think that is where General Khandare was talking out is going to be the beginning of war. And sometime back, our chief, former chief was making a statement. He said, when you're talking about a warfare, we do not know whether we are under attack today. In all probability, he says, we are under attack. Now, why do we guess that we are under attack? Because the cyber and the space domains is such that it is not the frontier soldier which is going to be targeted. You are going to be targeted with the critical infrastructure right in Delhi, or right people who are thinking and taking decisions. And therefore, all combined put together, if we had the deterrence of military earlier, later on we had a nuclear deterrence. Slowly we went into a global war on terrorism and hybrid war, and we built special forces as deterrent. I think today the deterrence is of technology. And I think the technology deterrent is foremost coming from the space. I said ultimately it is Uparwala, and space has reached that Uparwala situation where no technology other than the space technology will give birth to the other technologies. Because space scientist, what he produces can be used on the Earth, but what you produce on the Earth may not be used in the space. So ultimately, if you have the power, the material, the electronics that work in the space will work down below, but not the other way around. So therefore, R&D in space is extremely important, and it requires larger amount of R&D investment, and we will find that all the other sectors will come out of it. Speaking about the special forces, and speaking about the warning period, as General Khandare started talking about, I think we need to dress up the space for warfare. So therefore, launch on demand, the reusable techniques, and launch from the sea, because all the launch sites are going to be under observation. And then the SSA would take charge. But if there is a mobile facility not available anywhere, but then all of a sudden you launch from the sea, and you can launch a number of rockets from there, and you will find you can dress up the space for war, and that launch on demand is, I think, extremely important. And finally, I would, because of the time constraint, talk about ultimately the dual use will come for military applications if there is security, if there's hardening. So therefore, quantum technology and QKD is where I think large investment has to go, because if you have a hardened space application, platforms available to you, you can still use it for civil, but not the other way around. So whenever you start producing your hardware, look at how to harden it. And I think quantum technology is something where money spent on it and time spent on it shall never go wasted. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, General Pannu. A lot of important points have come up. So I'll invite General M.U. Nair to speak. He's the signal officer in charge, and his mandate actually covers all the three services, and we expect him to talk about the communication aspects of an integrated force and keeping into account the capabilities that space would offer. So while he gets ready, please dwell upon what General Pannu had said, and a large amount of budgetary allocation, a lot of R&D effort like what DARPA does, launch on demand from multiple options, sea, air, land, mobility into that, and the kind of preparation for space warfare. These are certain very relevant issues which all of us need to think about. And in the opening session, you heard the Secretary Health talking about utilization of space even for monitoring and ensuring well-being of the society. And in that, a large segment comes into the armed forces also. You are able to preserve the well-being of your armed forces, you have a force ready to fight. Otherwise, you get left out of battle, and that's not a very good thing to happen. So even those things we need to look at. Over to General Nair, and request about 8 minutes or so.
Thank you, General Khandare. General Khandare, the fellow panelists, distinguished guests here, ladies and gentlemen, I see a lot of service officers also here. It's wonderful to be called for a conference like this when you have the Indian Space Congress being organized such large scale. General Pannu was just mentioning that it's probably the largest gathering on space domain that he has ever seen. He was just mentioning it a little while ago to me. Extremely grateful to be part of this endeavor. General Khandare has actually given me a large mandate to cover. My expertise on the subject is that I've been a practitioner on this domain for a long time. We looked at space as a domain right from 2000, early 2000s. Though as a signal officer, we have been using the resources, space-based platforms right from 70s when the ISRO started its first endeavor into space. We've been using satellite platforms for communications. Some point of time, we were hiring transporters from countries, friendly foreign countries, who were providing us with supporting services. We migrated to the ISRO services later on, and now we have large dependency on space-based platforms for our communication requirements in the Army, as also for the other two services, as also for the requirements of the Ministry of Defense. Now, I have been part of the Indian Army for a long time. I worked with the IDS in the Ops branch and in branch. I had the privilege of working with both General Khandare and General Pannu. And it's wonderful that I get to speak to an audience like this when the Prime Minister himself has announced that the space is a vision and defense space is going to get a fillip in the future years. So I look forward to a lot of changes with the industry participation. Now, the challenges which I face, I'm a user, and the challenges I face is actually tremendous. I keep speaking about it, that, we are looking at communication, surveillance, that is ISR, inputs over a vast area, the Indian Ocean, the vast Indian Ocean region, 7,500 kilometers of coastline, large economic zone, island territories which are much beyond our capabilities of our terrestrial-based surveillance systems to actually monitor, even the aerial surveillance systems. So we need to have our surveillance systems, communication platforms deep in space. Coming on to our western borders and northern borders, the challenges are more difficult because we have high mountains, we have multiple ranges which prevents us from communicating on line of sight. So we need to use beyond line of sight. That's where we again look at satellite as a satellite space-based platforms as a domain for communications. When we talk about space-based platforms for communications and for surveillance, when you operate in these heights, at these altitudes, we have actually faced challenges in terms of communicating during difficult periods of weather, terrain. We had heavy snow locations where we are unable to get our signals through at some point of time. The space-based surveillance fails because of cloud coverage, etc. These are challenges as a user which I have been actually facing. Now, how do we overcome all this? Then, when we have blackouts on space domain, how do you communicate? We are currently dependent on terrestrial media's optical-based systems for our communications in these remote areas. Now, they may not survive this vagaries of weather. So again, we go back to satellite communications for our forces to actually be in touch with each other for exercising their command and controls. Today, we have a large number of platforms which are either aerial or terrestrial based, which require control. The control signals come through space-based platforms again. Now, it's essential that we continue this endeavor. I'm sure many of the industry participants are aware of these challenges which we are facing, and we're looking forward to a lot of support in these domains. While I talk about space-based platforms and communications, the one segment which actually forget is the ground segment. Now, unless we have a robust ground segment to support these platforms which are operating in space, we are actually not deriving the benefits of this high bandwidth or high image resolution, which high resolute cameras which are there, surveillance systems which are there. Now, how do you carry out movement of these pictures on ground? It's a challenge which we have faced. We have established a robust ground segment, but it requires to be further strengthened. Now, over seminars like this, conferences like this, we have been hearing about improved technologically enabled software-defined satellites, etc. Now, as a signal officer in chief, I can tell you that today we don't have a potent software-defined radio platform on ground. Now, we are talking about space. Now, this is again where I'm looking at each one of you for helping me out with providing us with best technology, both as part of ground segment as also as space segment. Now, we need to use this. This is a challenge I throw to each one of you. Since I have worked in the cyber domain too, so I'm sure we must have actually spoken about the conflicts which are the ongoing conflict which probably entered its 9th month now, where the space-based platforms have both been attacked. There have been cyber vulnerabilities detected. There have been paralysis of communication systems, of command and control failures due to blackouts, cyber attacks. All these are eventualities which can happen on a space-based platform too. So how do we find solutions to this? So what I require in the Army as part of our tri-services organizations is a robust, a very, very vibrant system, like space-based assets network, which can provide me with communication, which can give me a ecosystem on ground, a ground segment which is extremely vibrant, an analytical tool. Now, communications provide you with information which need to be converted to intelligence. Now, I get about huge, humongous data which comes as part of our surveillance as ISR. Now, how do we analyze this? So this is another challenge which we are looking at separately. Today's AI-based solutions are being offered, but we have challenges in terms of the image qualities being very, very poor, the videos, the audio inputs which we are getting in multiple formats. So these are some of the challenges which we are struggling with. Notwithstanding that, in our attempt to go into tri-services domain, we have established the Defense Space Agency, about which I'm sure the DG would speak about. We have also had the Defense Cyber Agency. We are trying to actually get things in order so that we can get the best out of whatever we have. We look towards the industry in supporting us with very robust platforms, network, as I had mentioned. A few other challenges which I face in this domain. Now, I mentioned about, you're all space, we are looking at space-based platforms. We're looking at instantaneous communication, like we have the OneWeb coming in. Now, can we use our data in remote locations without support of terrestrial media? Now, that's what we are looking at. We're looking at like what you have in the Starlink. Can we have solutions where handheld sets are there which can communicate, which can provide us with connectivity, which can be used for military operations as also during HADR situations. Now, when you have disaster, we actually are all our terrestrial grid fails. That's where I'm looking for opportunities where I can communicate freely at any point of, any point, in wherever I'm in immaterial of a location. Actually, I can communicate, and even I can have our soldiers speaking to their families who are located elsewhere. So even as part of our welfare communications, we're looking at solutions in these domains. General Pannu mentioned about, General Khandare also mentioned about budgetary constraints. I don't think there are any constraints. We have actually plans in place. We already have a couple of platforms which are already working for the armed forces. We are already, few more platforms are in the pipeline. I'm sure the DG, DSA will touch on these issues. And the Army, we are looking at a platform for which the AON has already been granted. We are looking at a dedicated military satellite for the Army, which should come up in the near time frame, working closely with the ISRO for that. So many of our challenges will get addressed, but we still require the support of the ecosystem which is there, the vibrant one which has been created over a period of time. And I'm sure the meetings like this will help us to reach out to each one of you. We also have our island territories. Let's look at Andaman Nicobar, widespread area where the island territories, we require to communicate with each one of them. So we're looking at robust communication setup covering all the island territories, both in the eastern coast of ours as also in the western coast, the Lakshadweep, where we need to have satellites with footprint so that we can communicate near instantaneously. At this point of time, we have multiple layers of communications through the Defense Communication Network, the services-specific networks providing connectivity in these locations. Now, we need to get our all of them together. So that's what we are attempting to do at this point of time as part of our theaterization, etc. Budgets are not a constraint, and I'd like to assure, so you are aware of it, that satellites, the space-based platforms are being given a lot of importance. As the Prime Minister himself announced that defense space is a very, very opportune, it's full of opportunities for each one of you as part of the industry. And as a user, I look towards each one of you to support us in our endeavors. Space warfare, yes, it's something which is futuristic at this point of time for me. I look towards current situations and solutions to what can meet my requirements on ground. I heard Dr. Satish Reddy mentioning about SAT, anti-SAT techniques, etc., etc. No, we have adequate redundancies where we have our resources in multiple transporters on multiple satellites. So there could be some degradation which is going to take place, but I'm sure we will be able to tide over situations where one satellite not being available for a limited duration, we can always tide over such situations. I look towards each one of you for supporting us for our requirements. We have in the Army a large number of procurement cases, especially as part of our emergency procurement, where we are looking at SATCOM terminals for providing communications in our remote areas, SATCOM terminals on the platforms which can actually move and then keep pace with our mechanized formations which are operating. Many of the RFPs are already out, some are on the anvil, they'll be out. So we look towards industry, all of you, to help us to achieve these capabilities. And these are, and the armed forces on its own cannot actually build these capabilities without a very active and vibrant industry. And we look towards the academia, the industry, to give us support in these domains. I'm extremely grateful for the organizers for calling me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, General Nair. Next on the line for speaking is Marshal Bedi. And while he gets ready, I'll just explain. He's a thoroughbred fighter pilot who has done all possible correct courses for the development of the aerospace sector, and he has had experience of a foreign exposure also in Europe. So he's quite well aware of the technology. And while he gets ready, just dwell upon what General Nair brought out, the terrain challenges, the climatic challenges, the remoteness and the difficulties even of space weather. And he was particularly emphatic when he said budgetary issues are not an issue, and exhorting the industry to reach out and come up with solutions. Def Expo was the platform from where Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced about defense space, and 75 challenges thrown open to the industry for indigenization. So that is the intent of the government, which has been made very clear. And we all need to put our shoulder to the wheel and ensure that whatever quality product we are going to provide to the armed forces or the security sector has to be done in time. The technology cycle, as it keeps changing, from a number of years, it has come down to a number of months. The era of launching heavy satellites with a life of 10 years, I think it's long gone. We need multiple satellites, constellations in multiple orbits, and we need to have the technology upgrades in a matter of months. So that is why the life of these satellites and then making them heavier is actually not required. Every time there is a satellite up for about 10 years, you can take it that you are missing about 3 to 4 technology cycles upgrades. So that is something that we need to look at. And over to Marshal Bedi.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In a similar conference being conducted in the USA in the year 2002 on providing networking military solutions through the prowess of technology, the Chief of Staff, United States Air Force, General John P. Jumper, had this to say. He said, "The sum of all wisdom is a cursor over the target. Any defense technology that does not help in placing cursor over the target of choice is practically of no use." With this principle in the background, I am going to speak about simplifying space for complex tasks. With particular reference to A2AD, that is anti-access area denial, there are two small parts to this talk. I'll take the second part first. Anti-access essentially means actions intended to slow down deployment of enemy forces into a theater or cause forces to operate from a distance farther than the locus of conflict that they would prefer. It encompasses multiple domains like air, land, sea, EW, cyberspace. My focus will essentially be on air and space. Area denial is actions intended to impede operations within areas where access cannot be denied or prevented. And area denial affects maneuvers within a theater. To represent it pictorially, it would look something like this. The threat will be from various weapons of long range, having long range by themselves or brought in by long range aircraft. The access will be prevented through long range air defense missiles or prevent aircraft sent across. As shown here, the scenario will slowly change from anti-access to area denial as you move from tier 1 to tier 4, and various elements encompassed are depicted. You know, in simple language, I feel it's like sleeping in a mosquito net with some repellent in the room and with some cream application on your body. I speak simple language because my transition from binoculars to James Webb Telescope view has been very recent. And so my ideas are still in the initial expansion stage. That is the reason I haven't yet dared to enter into real space and would stay below the common line. However, within that, there is an area which is far less explored. As you see, the influence of conventional aircraft is restricted to about 20 kilometers approximately. Hence, this becomes my area of interest. Now, it's not viable to fly an aircraft very high up here. You can't sustain a satellite here. So it's neither air nor space, or should I say it's both air and space, because if it's not space, then it must be air, and if it's not air, then it must be space. Whatever it is, what's the plan like? But before I elaborate on this new idea, what I call a complex task, I come back to my first part about which I wish to talk about, that is simplifying space, because it's really important and I find spending a few minutes over it really worth it. Now, we have heard here enough that the new ideas in space would need high allocations of R&D, and the government budgets cannot support that. The assurance by general officer notwithstanding, that's what general consensus has been. Not that the governments are not keen, they have limitations of convincing people that why huge sums of money is required to be allocated for space activities in the face of so many shortfalls in routine living. I came across a tweet which said, what's the point of finding water over Mars and Moon when people are dying of local, routine shortages on Earth? Well, it's a point of view, but the fact is that the governments do have a challenge. So you need private participation big time. Apart from direct investment, you also need indirect investment by public through big business houses. Now, how will a big business house convince its shareholders of massive investments in space unless general public understands what is there for it in space? Space is a very niche domain confined to very few. Since it is rocket science, its language, terminology, and expressions are far beyond the common man's understanding. Neither he makes an attempt to understand, nor the space community tries to explain. If a common man, or if I were to talk to a space scientist, you will find he will seem to just go round and round. But if a common man has to invest in space, he has to understand space. Or if he has not to object the allocations of, or the government allocations. The onus here lies with the space community and not with the man himself. Instead of implosion of ideas within this limited space community, you need to create an explosion of ideas that can reach the space or that can reach the masses easily. Practically, everyone has been quoting our Prime Minister, and I also quote, that no space should be left between the common man and the space technology. Interpretations have been probably different. While this community interprets it as that this vision would be realized when the broadband or internet reaches the common man, I would like to also interpret or add that probably his vision would be realized when common man starts to understand what is space all about. But how do you do that? One of them would be to introduce space education from an early stage. There are many education programs which are conveyed yesterday in capacity building chapter, but almost in all of them, the approach seems to be passive in nature. That is, anyone who's interested in space can come forward and they will be helped. I am talking of an active approach where interest is induced in space. The education program in space has to be on the lines of medicines, common engineering, and software through a structured approach at an early stage itself. We heard some 200 channels being launched for the education this morning. Hope some of them or large number of them are devoted to space education. Now, I am not the only one suggesting this. Well, there is no comparison, but the White House recently announced a pilot training program that could bring more underrepresented groups into space sector. The new push aims to bring more diversity to the space workforce through a wider swath of educational institutions beyond the Ivy League and other rich engineering and science schools. At the National Space Council in September this year, Vice President Kamala Harris urged to move beyond very rigid disciplines in space sector that are often a barrier to diverse community due to investment and money involved. The aim worldwide is to expand the space sector, for which we need to simplify space. Coming back to my area of interest, now it's not viable to fly a plane here, and I can't launch a satellite here for obvious reasons. One, you can't generate those kind of orbital speeds. And second, your sovereign space is limited to your borders, and probably it will be difficult for a satellite to oscillate between that, just on the lighter side. So what is the option then? Let me warn you that theoretically, everything remains an impossibility till it is done. My aim is to tell you what is to be done, how it is to be done is your domain. So what is the option? Well, balloon is an option, but to do what? Balloons have been used for observation, tourism, and there are attempts being made to carry a rocket up there between 20 to 100 kilometers to launch a satellite into low Earth orbit. This is what prompted me to think that could this balloon launch a missile, an air defense missile? The challenges perhaps could be much smaller than launching a satellite. The missile can clearly separate and ignite, communicating with the balloon, and in turn the missile guidance should not be a problem, and the drift can be controlled by thrusters to keep it at or take it to the point of interest. That is where the space technology can help. Now look at the advantages over a ground-based air defense system of that caliber. First of all, no air traffic deconflicting issues with other aircraft. Not many weapons can reach it close to 40 kilometers altitude. Large air defense system on ground needs an other air defense system to protect it. Like, you can't keep launching very expensive long-range missiles at just about anything coming at it. Also, whatever be the max range quoted as achievable, it will always suffer from radar horizon limitations against low-flying targets or cruise missiles. By raising a system up at 40 to 50 kilometers, you would have increased the weapon reach tremendously, made it mobile, and taken it beyond the reach of conventional aircraft and its weapons. You will have to take it down by another specialist weapon only, so you are making it more expensive for the adversary, and it can sure protect itself from even that. By simple comparison of weights, it could comfortably carry 3 to 4 missiles. Its limitation is maneuverability, rendering it singularly vulnerable to determined attack. That can be overcome by placing multiple similar cheaper versions of that in the air. All of them need not be capable of carrying missiles. Only one of them needs to be, and others could be low-cost options as decoys. All these elements will encompass a complete weapon system, and you don't need to maintain such a system always. It will be on as-required basis, a kind of strategic asset. Once a balloon has launched a missile or you have demonstrated the capability, no one will ever come anywhere within its area of influence, whether it is carrying a missile or not. It can thus create a credible A2AD capability for a wide area. While operational advantages may be clear, the project will not take off only based on the operational advantages. It will take off only when economic advantage is realized. Take the case of reusable rocket technology. There is no doubt about its technical feasibility and advantages, but only those who can make it economically viable will use it. So that's where the game lies. The day it becomes more economical against the number of Su-30s or Rafales you need to create similar effect, you will have an AD system up at 40 kilometers or maybe higher. Space technology will have a great role to play in its realization. Question is, who does it first? Just to complete the picture of A2AD, I would like the attention to be drawn to optical stealth to mitigate the challenge of long-range weapons employing digital scene matching. They basically look for a scene in the new image that they have seen before. So they need to see a similar image for accurate attack. Like the stealth aircraft that employs radar absorbent material, we need to protect our VSVPs by optical stealth through light bending, passive adaptive camouflage, or visual cloaking. Like we have seen, using conventional nets to confuse human sighting of the target, then IR nets against IR sensors. Similarly, we can start efforts in this direction. Now, if you have to become self-reliant in the real sense, then you have to work on technology yourself and remain ahead of the curve, not that we can't do it. Simple case of UAVs. UAVs had been on the scene for a very long time, but we started looking at it only post-Kargil when we found gaps in surveillance. Very slow progress. Initially, the UAVs that we procured, even within Army and Air Force, they won't talk to each other. But see, where are we now? Every second startup is only talking of UAVs. So once you start understanding the importance of a technology and it becomes economically viable, probably sooner or later we will reach it. In a nutshell, we need to create space awareness and introduce space awareness at a much early stage in our education system, explore the large unused airspace to create credible air defense capability, and work on optical stealth to safeguard our critical VAs and VPs. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your patience.
Thank you, Marshal Bedi, for a new idea that he has propounded. But out of all the details that he has spoken, I will just touch a few. Next on the line is Air Vice Marshal Dhananjay Khot, the Director General of Defense Space Agency. While he gets ready, let me just highlight a few things which Marshal Bedi mentioned. And the most prominent out of that is about education and awareness. And on a lighter side, I think I will go beyond the school education, and I think we in our society need a lot of adult education, especially the decision makers who delay everything. So if that is sorted out, I think bulk of it will be sorted out. Internally, while Marshal Bedi did speak of a few things, and right in front of me is Ranjana Kaul, who is a legal expert. I think a lot of consultation will have to be done with her, because when you're talking of international space, the way you operate, there are many conventions which have to be looked at. And whether you're using a balloon, whether you're using missiles, what exactly do you want to do is something that when you develop that concept, a complete whole of nation approach would be required, and it's not difficult. Once you've embarked on a journey, you will obviously find solutions for it. So that is something which we will look at. But overall, a very invigorating talk, and a lot of thoughts have been thrown out. And the best part here is, since all of us are military officers, we finish on time. So over to Dhananjay, and let's see how you take it.
That's great. Thank you, General Khandare, the very distinguished panel of co-speakers here, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning to everybody, and heartfelt thanks to the SIA and Mr. Subbarao here for the invitation to come and speak and participate at this forum. I come from the Defense Space Agency. I'm the second Director General from its raising time. So like I say in jest, once in a while, we are also a startup. So we're about 3 years old, and we are on our growth story at this point of time. I'm going to step back a little from, the text of the battle and go to the context of the battle, just so that we're clear about what space security is all about. So when we talk of securing space, or defense or military aspects of space, what exactly are we securing? Unlike, geography, terrain, even oceans to that extent, air and space can't be fenced, it can't be mined. You can't build defensive works. Access is practically guaranteed. And that's what sets space and air apart from the terrestrial media. To start with, man has been on the ground, on Earth, living here, growing things here, hunting here, eating here, sheltering himself on Earth. And then he went on to the seas and so on and so forth. For livelihood, for fishing, for trade, and so on and so forth. So it was all towards livelihood. But when it took to air, and even more so when it took to space, it was with a military viewpoint. And the first forays of man in space was a V-2 rocket launched by the Germans against the United Kingdom in the Second World War. And from there starts the story of space. So man's first foray into space was military. And as my teacher and mentor in this particular area, Mrs. Kaul sitting here, she likes to say, space is primarily a military domain. And the trend of how things have progressed at this point of time sometimes is misleading. Sometimes it leads us to believe that it is essentially a commercial, or a trade domain. It's not. It will be used in that manner. We all stand to gain from it. That's the manner in which it should grow. But let's not ever forget the military overhang. So commerce in space is increasing, and that's one of the contextual changes that's happening. If space was driven, starting with the V-2, Second World War, progressing through the Cold War, the race in space, which triggered the progress in space technologies, and the spin-offs of which came into the civilian domain, we saw at the end of the Cold War that the nature of application of space changed, and in the last 20 odd years, it is these spin-offs which have kind of taken center stage. So what we see today is a huge amount of entry of the civilian sector into space, a great thing. And in fact, it is last year that the civilian presence in space has actually overtaken military presence in space in terms of number of objects, this last year, in 2021. And that is set to grow. There's going to be thousands more of objects in space, primarily oriented towards civilian and trade and commerce aspects. And that's one contextual change that has happened. Space has penetrated into the common man's life. It's in your mobile phone, it's in your laptop on the internet, it's in your cable TV and your satellite DTH. It's with your Ola cab driver, and that's navigating you. So communications, positioning, navigation, timing, the timing thing, your entire banking system works on it. So your entire livelihood, commercial, everything is now being underpinned by space applications. And this is a very important thing to understand, because it makes all of these things a viable target. It makes all of you a viable target. So it's not about guarding the borders, geographical borders anymore, because the battle has been brought to your homes. And any disruption to any of these space applications means that your means of livelihood can be disrupted. The very manner in which you live can be disrupted. It's an important thing to realize. So when we talk about security of space and the implications thereof, this is the context within which we have to understand it. That makes you the soldiers as well. And that's why that civil-military partnership is so important, and why the stakeholders include not merely people in uniform or people in government, but even the private citizen and industry. What's the future of this entire space context? We're about to leave the Earth-centric zone behind. In the next 20 to 30 years, there's going to be more space stations. There's going to be asteroid mining, moon mining, Mars mining, space colonies, probably starting with robots and then ending up with manned colonies. All of this is within reach, which means the cislunar zone, as it is called, Earth, Moon, Mars, Lagrange points, etc., that is the zone within which entire economies superior to all economies on Earth are going to build up. And so your security now goes much further out. Are we going to approach it as, one mankind? Probably not. We will still carry our state identities into it, and we will carry our competitions into it. So with that as the background, let me come to what does the military man do in space. So what is the nature of military space applications? So warfare in space can take place in three broad ways. Warfare through space, warfare in space, and warfare from space. Through space has been how it began, and that's an established military practice and established military domain. Space to space has so far not been seen directly. However, there is any amount of literature on the net that you can find. Plenty of research and development going on in that particular regard, and concepts and philosophies are there. Space to Earth, not yet been seen in practice. Future possibilities? Yes, once again under R&D. So far, there are certain rules and regulations, and certain treaties that are in place which prevent, so to say, weaponization of space. That has not really curtailed the research and development into the area. And so the rest remains to be seen. It's an unanswered question as of today. When it comes to what we do in space or what we are required to do in space, two principal things. One is space applications, which is enabling things on the ground to happen. That is enabling the Army and the Navy and the Air Forces and the other security forces, which is principally through communications, through positioning, navigation, timing technologies, and through information dominance, that is ISR. And the second part of it is securing space, which is space operations. And the principal thrust of that is to retain our freedom of operations in space, our freedom to launch, our freedom to maneuver, our freedom to guarantee our interest in space by securing our things. What are the threats? Since most of the activity in space comes out of satellites and spacecraft that orbit the Earth, it is essentially anti-satellite. There are plenty of anti-satellite technologies that are spoken about. There are 4 countries who have tested it, including us. Now, these are direct ascent technologies where rockets take off from the Earth and go hit a satellite. And that's Earth-based anti-satellite, kinetic. There are non-kinetic means as well, which could be cyber, soft kill, directed energy weapons, which would be laser dazzling or laser damage to sensors, sensitive sensors, and so on. It could be electromagnetic pulse, microwaves, and so on and so forth. So there's a whole range of soft kill options that are also there. You can also hit space capability by hitting the ground segment, either through hard kill or through cyber and other soft kill options. So that is the nature of the threat, and the whole idea is to acquire enough resilience and enough protection of our interests and of our assets. So where does DSA come in now? We're about 3 years old, like I said. And the principal mandate for us is to secure our interest in space. What this means is fundamentally we need to create adequate capability. Capability primarily that will deter. So capability development is our principal story at this point of time, and that is what we are crafting. It's a growth story. Modest beginnings, and we're going to grow from this point on. At some point in future, we'll probably blossom into a space command with a large number of capabilities and functionalities. So capability development means, first of all, creating the appropriate asset profiles in space, on the ground, the hardware. That's where industry comes in, that's where academia comes in, that's where Atmanirbharta comes in. Because as of now, there are certain niche technologies which are held by a few owners. Automatically, it goes without saying that there will be restricted access to them, and there'll be denial regimes in place. We need to overcome those, and therefore a huge amount of thrust is required for indigenous development of those capabilities. In addition to that, we have to create the human resource pool. As of now, we do have a large number of people. They're largely within the ISRO domain, and that's a great thing. And the spillover from ISRO is what's coming into industry as we speak. And we need to find ways of developing the talent, retaining it within the space pool and within the country, preventing a certain amount of brain drain that naturally happens in this process. So HR and training are important components of what we need to do in terms of capability development. The next is to build those doctrines and strategies, in which process we have come a fairly long way. We are at a fairly advanced stage of articulating our space doctrines and our space strategies. They're not yet out, but we have come some distance on that. And that allows us to express that capability in coherent ways that matches the situations and is appropriate to the situations. And lastly, in order for both these things to work, for the capability development as well as for the strategies and the doctrines to actually work in practice, we need the ecosystem that will underpin this entire story. And that's why DSA engages intensively with academia, with industry, in our attempt to ensure that the research and development and the path taken is aligned with the long-term story of DSA, of space security for India, and for the space development in the country as a whole. So resilience is a very important part of how the capability is backed up. If at all it gets into a crisis situation, maybe a warlike situation, maybe kinetic operations and so on and so forth, and you lose assets in the process, you need the industry capability to revive and to restore that capability in a short time frame, which means a buildup of capacities is required. That's again where industry comes in. So this is broadly the story going ahead. What do we find? We are very bullish about this story. We believe we have tailwinds. We believe that we were born at a time which was very opportune, and we believe that these tailwinds are going to carry us fast and far forward. Why? Number one, there is a government-driven, PMO-driven, top-down push, and which is opening doors at an unprecedented pace, which is fantastic. New policy structures are being created, old ones are being dismantled, new procedures are coming into place, and there is the entry of the private sector into the space domain, which means for the first time we are going to tap into the larger talent pool of the country, which is near unlimited. There's 1/5 of humanity within the borders of this country. Huge, trained and trainable manpower. We have everything going for us. So I think the story going ahead is a very positive one, and we believe that the whole of government and the whole of nation approach, which everybody talks about, needs to find itself into, it needs to manifest itself in practical ways. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you. Thank you, Marshal Khot. And I just want to bring out one observation. I've been here for the last 2 days. This is the 3rd day. And the most well-attended session is this one. I see the entire hall full. But I had actually thought the hall will be full where commerce and economy drives. But I realized your attendance shows me one common sense factor, that unless the space is secure, you have no place. So that is one part. Secondly, despite the full house, it actually breaks my heart not to take questions, because you saw the graceful lady coming and whispering to me that we are already overshooting time. Then I had to remind her that we started late. So military starts on time, finishes on time. But I would request you, in case there are some pressing questions, comments, you can pass it on to the organizers and we will definitely get back to you. Your contact can be given to us. And a very sincere request to the organizers, sir, with due apologies. I think 55 minutes for this entire session was too less, despite the fact that 2 participants were very cooperative of not turning up. So I think we need at least half a day session. Thank you so much, Jai Hind, and all the best to everyone.
Thank you very much indeed. I would request the panel to kindly remain on the stage, as we are now going to have a report launched by PwC, which is on space for defense in India. And for the launch, I would like to invite Mr. Vishal Kanwar, MD PwC, and I would also request Dr. Subbarao Pavaluri, President SIA-India, and Mr. Anil Prakash, Director General SIA-India, to kindly join us on the stage for the report launch by PwC. Also inviting Mr. Anil Prakash, Director General SIA-India, to kindly join us on the stage. And ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together on the report launch by PwC, Space for Defense in India. So one more group photograph. I request everybody to step forward. So we would request you to kindly hold the report in your hands. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.